Alright, everyone, welcome along to another episode of Martin's World. Guys, today's guest I'm delighted to bring to you is Dana Larsen, and Dana Larsen is another cannabis activist like myself, but he's based over in Canada. And before I get into the introduction of Dana, I'd like to just remind you guys if you'd like to support the show and support the fight for cannabis legalization in Ireland, you can sign up to the patreon.com/Martin's World, or you can also make donations in the form of bitcoins up on martinsworld.e. All of the money that will be gathered there will be used to set up and establish a cannabis activist hub here in Cork City, and to better our fight for cannabis legalization in Ireland. So, and thanks to everybody who's already made a donation there and signed up to the Patreon, guys. Much thanks to all of you. So, guys, Dana Larsen. If you don't know Dana Larsen, well, Dana Larsen has long been a long time cannabis activist, a lot longer than myself anyway. He's also spent 10 years as an editor of the Cannabis Culture magazine. He's the co-founder of the Vancouver Seed Bank and a former vice president of the Canadian Association of Cannabis Dispensaries. He's the current director of the Vancouver Dispensary Society and also director of Sensible BC. He's a founding member of the BC Marijuana Party and the Canadian Marijuana Party also. In 2003, he joined the National Democratic Party and ran in 2008. And in 2011, he also ran for the leadership of the National Democratic Party. He also in 2016 began a campaign, and this is where I learned of Dana Larsen and his activism, to overgrow the government, where he was sending cannabis seeds to anybody who got in touch with him. And he, in that first year, sent out over 2.3 million seeds to people. And by 2019, that had grown to almost 10 million seeds, or over 10 million seeds sent out to people to overgrow the government. Dana has also authored a number of books, including Hairy Pothead and The Marijuana Stone, Green Buds and Hash, The Pie-Eyed Piper, and Cannabis in Canada, The Illustrated History. And in fairness to him, despite all of this stuff he's already done, there's still more to come, because he's also been the organizer of many 420 events down at the Sunset Beach. These are big, massive smoke ups, often attended by many thousands of people over there in BC. He's also organised the Cannabis Day Parade, which takes place on July 1st every year, and he's also part of the Global Marijuana March, which is the first Saturday of May. So, guys, without further ado, that was an awful lot of work there that Dana Larsen has done, and I hope you really enjoyed the interview with Dana Larsen and myself. So, guys, enjoy. Peace. So, Dana Larsen, welcome along to Martin's World podcast. I first came across yourself back in 2016. I was an activist with Students for Sensible Drug Policy at the time here in Ireland. I set up a chapter, but I became aware of your campaign to overgrow the government, and I started using the hashtag actually afterwards, because it's a very catchy phrase. But if you could, maybe we could start there a little bit on that. I believe it was nearly 12 million seeds you gave away over the course of that
Uh,
campaign.
yeah, we did over 10 million seeds. I started it in 2016, did it for years. It was a ton of work, but basically I had access to a very large number of cannabis seeds. These were low THC, high CBD seeds, although in the first year I also did give away a lot of THC seed cannabis as well. But the idea behind this campaign was to get Canadian cannabis in public places, to normal and just making it more widely available. And I've been doing a lot of other cannabis activism in my life since I was a teenager. Really, I've been doing this for over 30 years, and this was the first time I'd ever been arrested for a cannabis campaign. Was doing this seed giveaway, and giving away seeds is illegal in Canada. It still is now, even though we've legalized marijuana. Giving away seeds like that is still prohibited. Only certain kinds of cannabis have been legalized in Canada. Um, but along with my seed giveaway, we were doing it by mail, but I also launched a national tour as well. I had just written a book at the time about the history of cannabis in Canada. And so I went to over 20 cities from coast to coast in Canada, and I would rent a hall and do a talk for about the history of cannabis in Canada, and then I would give everyone a pack of 100 cannabis seeds. And these events were really well attended. I would get a couple of hundred people coming out to my talks and the seed giveaway. And in the second city I went to was the city of Calgary, which is in Alberta, which some is Canada's probably most conservative province, not very cannabis friendly. And there was a woman in Vancouver who's kind of my nemesis, who doesn't like what I'm doing and thinks I'm turning Canada into a narco state. And so she was calling all of my venues that I was going to be speaking at and saying, Dana's going to be giving away seeds, and this is against the law, and you guys are liable if you have them here. And she called the police in all these cities. And in Calgary, the police showed up at my event. Dozens of police officers showed up. I just kept going on with my talk. And then as I was finishing my talk, I heard that one of our volunteers had been arrested. He had gone out to the truck to grab more seeds, and the police had grabbed him and grabbed our truck, which was a rental vehicle, and arrested him. So I went outside to see what was going on. And actually, it really worked out perfectly. We had a huge crowd there that was very upset. The police, I talked to the officer, saw our friend in the car. I said, well, it's my event, and I'm the one giving seeds. I don't normally seek out to be arrested, but if you're going to arrest somebody here, you should be arresting me, not this volunteer. He didn't do anything.
Yeah.
And the police officer said, I don't really want to arrest you. And I said, oh, well, you're gonna. And I had people give me some cannabis seeds. And I, in front of the police officer, I gave cannabis seeds to people in the crowd. I said, look, I've got seeds in my hand. I just gave some to those guys. If you're going to arrest this guy, you have to arrest me. So he said, all right. And they marched me across the whole parking lot, big crowd, media pictures, big crowd all chanting shame. Took me away, put me in a cell overnight. And in the morning, I was able to get bail and be released. But because of the attention that this arrest drew, I was able to give away way more seeds. My seed requests went way up because I got all this media coverage. Hoping I could give away 1 million seeds in the first year. Wasn't sure if I was going to get enough requests. Ended up doing 2 million in the first year because of the attention that was given. And I continued my tour across Canada. No other police decided to show up anywhere else, which is good because I was on bail at that point and could have faced more serious repercussions. But I was able to finish my tour across Canada. And then the next year in 2017, I did the same thing again. And my lawyer said, you can do your tour, but don't go back to Calgary. That's going to be trouble. I said, okay, I won't go back to Calgary. And I was doing my tour and I thought, I have to go back to Calgary. I can't ignore this city. And so at the end of my second tour, I returned to Calgary. It got a lot of attention in the city. Oh, Dana's coming back. Are they going to arrest him again? But the organizers of the events were a lot more ready this time. And so the media was all there for my second talk in Calgary. We rented a big hall. And the organizers said, if the police try to arrest Dana, we're going to link arms and form a circle around him, and we're going to protect him. I thought, well, this is amazing. This is wonderful. And a few cops showed up at the event. They shook my hand. They did not want to have a giant confrontation with the big crowd, and so they left. So I was able to do my talk and give away, thousands of more seeds in Calgary again. I finally had my trial about 8 months after that, so about a year, almost 2 years after the initial charge. You want your trial to be all about the profound issues around seeds and cannabis and access and freedom and liberty and all this stuff. But in Canada, we have very strict rules about how long you can wait before something goes to trial. Yeah. A few years ago, our Supreme Court was upset so many cases were taking so long and laid down very strict guidelines. So my whole trial was about, they just missed the deadline, and it was about whose fault it was. Was it my lawyer's fault or their lawyer's fault? Because if it's your own lawyer's fault, then the deadlines aren't the same. So it was all about, well, we called you on this day and you took 2 days to call us back. And at the end of it, the judge threw out the whole thing, told the Crown they were being ridiculous. They had taken way too long. And so it all got tossed, and I was able to keep doing the campaign for a few more years. I ended up canceling it this year. I did 2016, 2019, but the amount of effort involved for this thing was huge. We would get 15,000 people requesting seeds by mail. It's a massive effort. I would have dozens of volunteers over at my house sorting seeds out into the containers, putting labels on envelopes, sending this stuff out. It was a huge effort. And so after 10 million seeds in 4 years, I figured that was enough. Yeah. I think I've given more seeds to more people than anybody else in history, as far as I know, in that kind of a unique way of giving each one, 100 seeds or so. And it was really good. People are still thanking me for that and enjoying the seeds they had. And I think cannabis should be able to grow freely, and that was my effort to try to make that happen.
What an incredible effort it was, and I'm sure that it definitely contributed to the changing of the laws over there. Although it mightn't have been in favor of the community, the changing of the laws, but slowly it seems to be changing a bit more there now. I know at the start of cannabis legalization in Canada, there was a bit of a mess there with the way in which they were getting it supplied to the market. They really cut out the grassroots activists, the people there on the ground who were doing things. So I'm hoping we don't see the same here in Ireland once we see some changes. We've a bill up before our government here now this year. So I'm hopefully going to take a leaf from your book and copy some of your campaigns here in Ireland. I began it last year by planting a cannabis plant in the city hall of our city hall here in Cork City. So that was just one small effort, but I'll certainly be doing what you were doing and giving cannabis seeds out to people and encouraging them to take part in a bit of guerrilla growing, because Ireland is certainly cut out for it anyway.
No, absolutely. It seems shocking when you see a cannabis plant growing in public, but really, it shouldn't be a big deal. You know, cannabis is a wonderful natural plant, and seeing it growing in someone's front yard or in a traffic circle or in a public park or whatever shouldn't shock us. And of course, the reality is that there's dozens and dozens of plants that are growing publicly that are very toxic, that if you ate them or smoked them, you would kill yourself or be harmed. And we're not trying to eliminate all those plants, and nor should we. But cannabis, which is actually remarkably safe, and really you can't just munch on a cannabis plant. You got to make a bit of effort to dry it and smoke it or prepare it a certain way. It's, you know, if cannabis is growing at a playground or around young children, there's no harm. And people get worried, oh, cannabis and kids, but it's fine. And cannabis really should be growing anywhere. If you walk down the street and you see cannabis growing in someone's front yard, it shouldn't be shocking. You should be, you know, oh, those are lovely cannabis plants. That's great.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be more than that, really, right? But of course, we've got a long way to go till we get to that level of normalization of cannabis in our world.
Yeah, we certainly do. I had a good interview with Pepe Rivera, who brings up these kind of issues. He's a part of the Plantón Cuatro Vente there in it's a cannabis garden next to the Mexican Senate. But yeah, Pepe Rivera was talking about that kind of thing, that basically when legalization happens, like if you're allowed to grow 6 plants at home, it's like, why aren't you allowed to grow 7? What is it about the 7? Where are these arbitrary numbers coming from? When it comes to alcohol and things like that, we don't have the same restrictions in place. At least I don't know in Canada, but you can probably walk into an off license and buy a large amount of alcohol and walk right out the door. But with cannabis,
yeah, there's no limit on alcohol production or home alcohol brewing. In Canada, legalization came with a 4-plant home cultivation limit. And of course, 4 plants is much better than 0 plants. I mean, absolutely, it's a huge step forward, but it's a very arbitrary limit to have 4 plants. And then that was a federal level. So the Canadian government said you can grow 4 plants. 2 provinces said, no, we're not allowing that in our province. And now there's court case going on about whether the province has the right to ban something that's legalized federally. Here in British Columbia, supposedly the most cannabis province in Canada, our government here said, well, you can grow your 4 cannabis plants at home, but if anybody can see those plants from the street or from any place, that's a crime. And you can go to jail for 3 months and be fined $5,000. So if you're growing cannabis on your porch or in your yard or in a window, and somebody can see it and calls in a complaint, that's a crime. And it's like, why? And this is a government in British Columbia that says we need to destigmatize drug users and we need to stop persecuting drug users. And yet they're so terrified of seeing a cannabis plant growing that they've criminalized that. It's kind of a sneaky way of not actually banning home growing, but making it extremely difficult to grow cannabis at home. Yeah. And you know, if you want to grow cannabis even outdoors in your yard, your landlord has to specifically sign off on that. It's assumed that you're not allowed to do it unless your landlord actually agrees. So it's not up to the landlord to ban it. It's up to the landlord to agree, or the default is that it's banned. And a lot of landlords don't really understand or are nervous. I can understand not wanting someone having a complicated grow up in their home, although that can be done very safely. But you know, that I can understand that being a risk, a certain amount there. But growing cannabis out in your backyard should not be a question for your landlord any more than your landlord saying, I don't like tomatoes, you can't grow tomatoes in your backyard. I mean, that's doesn't make any sense to me. So
I just see it as,
you know, legalization in Canada has a lot of good things. The number of people being arrested for cannabis possession is not 0, but it's dropped drastically, 99%, which, you know, in a city like Vancouver, where I live, where cannabis is very common and where police are more tolerant towards cannabis, we don't see a lot of arrests for possession anyways. But in much of Canada, it's much more rural. Much of Canada is northern, and in those areas, possession arrests were much more common. So that's a huge step forward. The challenge here has been about who gets to sell it and how the industry goes and who gets to make money off it. And we had a thriving industry in Canada of dispensaries that were there's hundreds across Canada selling cannabis openly, something that I think was actually sort of a prerequisite for legalization. We needed mass civil disobedience. We needed cannabis to be sold and widely available before they would legalize it. But this effort, there are some people who were members of the, you know, the cannabis activist community who have now gotten permits and are joining the legal system.
Yeah.
I'm not one of those people. I tend to prefer to be on the outside than on the inside in that regard, but it is still a problem, I think, and that cannabis legalization in Canada was really about profits and money making and about you know, insiders getting in there first and then seeing share prices go up. And in my opinion, legalization needs to be about an acknowledgement that prohibition was really the harm all along.
Yeah.
And legalization should begin with an apology and an acknowledgement and a recognition that cannabis is actually a pretty good plant. And you know, what'll happen is we'll get that apology 50 years from now. Our Prime Minister Trudeau, his dad was also Prime Minister in Canada. And I joke that it'll be the current Trudeau's kids who are the ones who are going to apologize for cannabis. You know, our Prime Minister Trudeau is apologizing for the way gay people were treated and the way racism was happening in Canada in many ways. But these are for specific issues that happened decades and decades ago. You know, now we apologize when everyone involved is dead. And when it's no longer controversial, okay, we'll acknowledge we were really racist 80 years ago, but acknowledging the things we're doing now that are wrong, that doesn't come until the future, right? So we've still got a long way to go, but I'm also very proud and pleased with Canada with the changes that have happened. You know, we've led the world in many ways on this issue, but it's still not nearly enough where what we've got to. So a long way to go.
Happening over there in terms of policies to address the people who've been displaced by the laws, you know, people who've got criminal convictions and stuff like that? Have they been cleared of their criminal conviction, similar to
Well, they launched I'm not even sure where that is. They launched a program to get, they didn't automate it. So you have to apply to get a pardon, but they did reduce, there was a lot of fees involved normally. And I think they reduced or eliminated most of that. So they made it easier for people to get a pardon.
Sure.
But the vast majority of people who have cannabis convictions have not been pardoned or had their records erased or anything like that in Canada. The number of people that have gone through the process have not been very many. And I think it's because it doesn't really make a big difference. Like for Canadians, one of the biggest issues around getting a cannabis conviction is not being able to travel to the US.
Yeah.
For many Canadians, that's a huge thing when you work there or just like live near the border, like to go across. And getting a pardon in Canada won't change your ability to enter into the US. The American government does not acknowledge those pardons on their end. Just admitting to an American border guard that you have used cannabis in the past is enough to get banned for life from the US. So most Canadians haven't really bothered because I think having a previous conviction in Canada, I mean, it might affect your ability to get bonded or certain employment, but most Canadians don't really care. It's not really going to affect your future in Canada, especially if you're a middle class person who you know, if you're poor or marginalized or whatever, these things could have a bigger long-term impact. But the vast majority of Canadians who have cannabis convictions have not applied for or received any kind of pardon or forgiveness for those crimes.
For those people who want to get involved in the industry that exists now, is that an issue for them? Is that a prerequisite for maybe?
Well, I mean, it depends. There's certainly people I know who have got criminal records for cannabis and who were, you know, cannabis activists who are now working within the system and have got their permits, and I think that's great. I think it depends. You know, some people, like here in Vancouver in British Columbia, it's very difficult to get a license to run a legal cannabis shop, and there's a lot of people that have applied that it's just taken forever, and these criminal record checks, and then they want you to like confess to all your previous cannabis crimes before they will give you a permit, and so you're like, well, I don't really want to list all the things that I did that were legal. It seems kind of worrisome, you know, to have that all on a file somewhere. So You know, it depends on the province and on the situation, but I wouldn't say all cannabis activists have been locked out. But the problem also is that the cannabis legalization, like the industry, is not very valuable. There's so many taxes, so much overhead. You know, here in Vancouver, to get a license to operate a legal cannabis shop, they charge you over $30,000 for your business license fee, and that is exponentially higher. Most business licenses are a few $100s. So this is like up to 100 times higher than a typical business license to run a cannabis dispensary. That really eats into your bottom line. And there's so many taxes and restrictions involved. It's not a very lucrative business. And most of the money in cannabis in Canada has been made in stock trades
Yeah.
and that kind of stuff, and pumping up your stocks and often making false claims about your business. And now we're seeing some of these giant companies have gone bankrupt. Many of them in the last year were laying off, hundreds of employees, shutting down big grow operations. And so, the headlines used to be, oh, this new big thing has started. They're going to grow so much marijuana. It's going to bring so many jobs to these communities. And now, not very long later, they're being shut down. People are losing their jobs. And a lot of the Canadian cannabis has been destined for overseas. We're sending cannabis to Germany and to South America and other places where I guess they can get a higher price per gram than selling it to Canadians. And I've just seen something, not that I'm against cannabis getting to other countries, but it seems there's something weird about that. And so it's still got a ways to go. I'm still part of the illegal industry. I run a dispensary in Vancouver that is unlicensed and that is not legal, and which is facing some challenges because of that. But we're actually having a good impact in terms of giving them competition and making them get their prices lower, making them get their quality better, and making
Excellent.
the legal industry better. And I would love nothing more than for my illegal dispensary to no longer be needed, because the legal system is so great, prices are low, quality is high, selection is there. No one's coming to my shop because I can't compete with the legal system.
Yeah.
That would financially be a problem for me. It's my business, but I would love that to happen. I would love nothing more than to see my shop go bankrupt because the legal system is so good that no one needs it anymore. But unfortunately, we're a long way from that.
Yeah.
And it was really medical cannabis that made the breakthrough in Canada initially. It was medical patients going to court. It was medical dispensaries. It was the medical aspect that gave us this legal protection. And now it's harder to get medicinal cannabis in Canada than it is to get quote unquote recreational cannabis. And that if you want medicinal cannabis, you've got to go to your doctor, you've got to get a prescription. You can only get it by mail order. If you go into a legal cannabis shop and you say, hey, I have trouble sleeping, or I've got cancer, or I've got whatever ailment, how can cannabis help me? They are legally forbidden from having that conversation with you. They cannot recommend strains or products. The medicinal cannabis is not being sold in Canadian stores. Only recreational cannabis is being sold in Canadian stores. Medicinal cannabis requires a whole bunch of paperwork and effort.
Yeah.
It's a bizarre situation where somebody with a severe medical need has a harder time accessing their medicine than someone who just enjoys using cannabis for social or other purposes. And of course, everyone should have all the cannabis that they want, but it's a bizarre situation where medical is more restricted than anything else in Canada. It's become backwards.
Yeah, that's always been the kind of the worry, isn't it? Really, that the medical cannabis, that it's not really that great. We see the same here with in Ireland. Our patients can only get medical cannabis from the Bedrocan, which are based in Holland, and they only produce one type of strain, which is sativa based. I believe it's based off of the old Jack Herer strain, and they've worked with that. But there's one patient who's currently living in Alicante over in Spain. So she's an exile out of Ireland. She's a medical cannabis refugee, actually. And she can get better access to cannabis on the kind of the somewhat black market in Spain, the way their clubs operate over in Spain, than she can get here in Ireland under the medical cannabis access program, where she has a license. But because what she says is the cannabis she gets off Bedrocan will most likely exacerbate her pain, because it will be stimulating her nerves because of the origin of the strain. Whereas in Spain, she can get really good indica strains that will actually help relieve her pain. So again, it's the same thing here. People can actually get better cannabis on the black market, let's say, rather than actually through the medicinal cannabis access programs. It's incredible. But one of the things I wanted to go back to a while ago, I was asking was about the criminalization aspect of it, because here in Ireland, if even if you just want to grow hemp, which is the industrial form of the cannabis, won't get you high or anything, I can't do that because I've a criminal conviction. We've been straight up blocked out of it. It's on the list of criteria that you can't have a criminal conviction when applying for a license just to grow hemp. Imagine, like it's crazy, but it's
No,
just,
that's sorry. It's yeah. These rules are too much. In Canada, they haven't. I mean, it's more accessible to those who were part of the illegal industry. It's not. It kind of depends. There's definitely people that have gone through that. They do want you to give a lot of information in that, but having a criminal record for cannabis, it might delay your application, but it's not a guarantee you're not going to get it. And certainly, many people have been able to get their permits in that situation. So could be better, but it definitely could be worse as well. They're not that restrictive here. Growing hemp is treated pretty much as tightly as growing, marijuana is, and I don't really think either should be treated very strictly. But certainly, growing industrial cannabis is too restricted in Canada as well.
what's it like running an illegal dispensary? It must be a bit worrisome. Do you get much hassle at all?
Well, the biggest challenge has been COVID last year in terms of keeping our business open and dealing with those kind of issues. We did get, we've been operating over 10 years. We used to have 2 locations, and actually we opened the 3rd dispensary in Vancouver about 11 years ago now. And we were really instrumental. There was only a couple before that in the city, and they were there. They weren't hiding, but they were also keeping a low profile and not seeking, extra attention. And when we opened ours, what we did differently is we really encouraged others to follow our example. And so we brought in dozens of people to our dispensary to show them every aspect of how we operated, to teach them exactly what we did. Here's how you run mail order. Here's how you run your stuff. Here's what we've learned. Here's the mistakes we've made, and encouraged others. And as a result, we weren't the only ones, but I think we were instrumental in helping there be hundreds of legal shops across Canada and getting that momentum going. And once there's some out there, people, oh, well, that guy's been operating for a while. He hasn't had any problems. I can do one too. And I would always tell people, well, just be aware of the worst case scenario. And if you can handle that, then go for it. And luckily in Canada, the worst case scenario for running a medical dispensary is not a lifetime in prison. It's not, it's more of a financial risk that you're going to go to court and have lawyers and fees, and maybe you could go to jail, but it's highly unlikely you're going to go to jail in Canada, which makes it easier to do this kind of civil disobedience. We've got a pretty strong charter of rights here and a pretty good legal tradition that makes it more easy to do some of the civil disobedience that might not work in other countries, or that might be more risky in other countries. Yeah. And so we had 2 open, and for a long time there wasn't any problems, but ultimately when there was over 100 dispensaries operating in Vancouver without permits, the city started getting worried this was getting out of control. I think it was wonderful. It was kind of a golden age of cannabis in Vancouver, the more selection than we've had in this city ever before or ever since. But there was a large court battle, and we ended up losing finally, and there was a court order, so we shut down one of our locations. So we only have 1 left now. One of them wasn't involved in the court case, and one of them was. Yeah. But we get lineups coming out the door for our dispensary, which does not happen with the legal shops, and shows that people are voting with their feet. Yeah. And the location that we shut down, we actually kept the spot, and we bought some of these FTIR drug analysis machines, and now we're running the world's largest center for free drug analysis. You can't test cannabis, but any kind of street drug, you can bring it in. We'll analyze it in 5 minutes with our spectrometer and tell you what's in it, if there's fentanyl, if it's pure, if there's fillers, if it's contaminated. And we now got online. We're approaching 10,000 test results. We'll be hitting that, I think, in January or February this year, which is unprecedented, and I'm really pleased about that. And it's all funded by marijuana money from our other dispensary. So, for me, it's about more. Although cannabis is key, it's about more than cannabis. It's really about ending the whole war on drugs and safe access to all these things, and that's just the start.
Can I ask how many people are employed at your dispensaries?
Well, we used to have a lot more when we had both going, but I think we've got now probably at the dispensary, there's 4 people sort of working at any one time, probably 8 or 10 staff working there normally. And then we got a few working in the intake department, and we have our mail order department. So probably close to 20 people right now, part-time and full-time. It was more than that when we had both locations going, and
that
we
doesn't
just
include
working in the drug testing center as well.
that doesn't include the growers, though. You're sourcing from other
Oh
growers.
no, not at all. And you know, I don't have the numbers in front of me, but at one point I calculated how many people were being employed by the cannabis industry in or the dispensary industry in Vancouver. When there was 100 shops out there, you know, that's like probably 2,000 people employed directly. And then all the products that come in, there's the grower, and then often you're selling like a food product or something. So there's the
Yeah.
people that converted that cannabis into something else for sale, and it resulted in tens of thousands of people being employed by this industry. And that's a lot of money and a lot of potential tax revenue and a lot of people's families and livelihoods. And so it's huge. I'm very pleased to be able to offer that. It's really a craft industry, a lot of people working in their own homes or on small scales to produce wonderful products. And we're very quality conscious. We reject a lot of things. You know, we don't just accept anything that gets brought into us. But there's a lot of really great products out there, and really provides employment and benefits to a lot of families. And that's the kind of cannabis industry that I like and that
Excellent.
I
Yeah.
like to be a part of.
Can I ask how the products differ between, say, your dispensary and a legal one in terms of the packaging? Because I've seen a lot of complaints coming from Canada in terms of the packaging requirements, that it's incredibly excessive and leads to a lot of pollution. Do you have the same kind of requirements of your own store?
No, we don't. I mean, there's certainly always plastic involved with cannabis, and you know, even in our situation, maybe it's more than it could be. But we're putting it into a baggie and labeling it and that. But it's the legal cannabis. Like you'll get a pre-rolled joint, a single joint. It'll be in a plastic tube. The plastic tube will be in a box, and that box will be in another box, and you get it mailed to you. So that goes into another box and another envelope, and it can be many layers involved getting to your cannabis. And you know, if you've got a large amount in there, it's one thing, but when you've got single grams or pre-rolled joints with multiple layers of packaging around them, it's really quite ridiculous. And there's also a lot of pretty scary warnings on cannabis as well, telling you you're going to become an addict, and 50% of cannabis users become addicts, and it's bad for mothers, and it's bad for children, and it's bad for your brain, and you know, all these things. It kind of harshes your high there, having to read all this stuff while you're smoking cannabis. And you know that there's maybe certain things to be aware of when you're using cannabis, but most of these warnings are way over the top and quite bizarre. And of course, the hypocrisy is that in Canada, there's no warning labels on alcohol.
Mm.
And when one of our territories, Yukon, a pretty small territory in Canada, their health department tried to do an experiment a couple of years back to put some warning labels on alcohol and do a research, see how it affected consumption. They were immediately threatened with lawsuits by the alcohol industry, and the Yukon government said, we can't handle this. We don't have the money to fight the alcohol industry. We're a pretty small territory. So they canceled this program. So we couldn't even get a trial run getting warnings on alcohol, where I do think they do belong.
Yeah.
And maybe there should be warnings on cannabis, but they're more about, you know, don't drop your joint in your lap and stuff, rather than about you're going to become psychotic or anything.
Yeah. I think
And
the one you should give is
so that's the hypocrisy. You know, I'm not against, you know, reasonable rules and awareness around cannabis, but when these rules aren't in place for other things, especially alcohol, which the rules in Canada around cannabis are so much more strict than they are around alcohol in every possible way, from purchasing and access to what the penalties are for using these substances in inappropriate ways or whatever. You know, if you get caught drinking alcohol in a canoe in Canada, you get a fine. It's against the law to drink alcohol in a canoe, and you'll get a $200 fine if the cop catches you. If you get caught smoking a joint in a canoe, you can go to jail for 6 months and get a $5,000 fine. And so, okay, I mean, I'd much rather, if I'm going to be in a canoe, I'd much rather be with the guy smoking pot than the person drinking alcohol. But maybe if they want to have a rule against smoking pot in a canoe, it shouldn't be worse than alcohol. It shouldn't be 10 times the fine and potential jail time. I don't think there should be any penalty at all, but at best it should be the same, right? And I won't bore. There's tons of examples like this where there's, you know, maybe a penalty around with alcohol, and the penalty with cannabis for the same thing is way more severe in ways that just make no sense. And it's really about stigmatization. Yeah. And the rules were not written by people that liked cannabis. They were written by people that are begrudgingly allowing legalization, and only if, you know, it's really not done in their best way. I mean, it's still better than nothing, but it's a big problem that this There's people passing cannabis rules while they're drunk, and people who love alcohol and don't like cannabis are the ones that are writing the rules for the cannabis industry, and it just leads to all kinds of ridiculousness.
Yeah, it's madness to think the requirements they have over there for some of the packaging in terms of the child proofing. And then you can walk into a shop and I'm sure you can get a bottle of beer that you can open exactly like you would open a bottle of fizzy pop, like, you know,
Oh
the
yeah, and there's
soda.
all kinds of hard lemonade and liquors and things where the word alcohol is barely mentioned on the bottle. These things are very tasty. I mean, I do support adult restrictions on things like edibles. You know, you're not going to kill anybody, but you don't want your marijuana brownie sitting out where a kid can access it. I understand that, and I agree with that, right? We need child-proof packaging on some of these things, but a joint or that, there's no harm to a child because they're not going to eat it. They can't, to light it, if they can light the joint, they're going to be able to get into the packaging. You know, we don't tobacco and child-proof packaging in Canada. And if a child eats a cigarette, which they're not gonna, because cigarettes taste gross, but if a child eats a cigarette, that is a lot more potentially harmful eating a cannabis joint, right? And so once again, the rules in place are not making a lot of sense compared to other substances that are much more risky. So I support child-proof packaging for edibles, but these warnings and labels and the packaging involved is extreme in Canada, and is going to need to be fixed at
Yeah.
some point. Probably will take years, if not decades, to get new rules in place.
Yeah, well, hopefully sooner rather than later. Anyway, we seem to be having a growing problem over here in Ireland with the edibles now and things like that coming onto the market. I say a problem actually, then just re-quoting our media over here saying we have a problem with it because before Gardaí weren't really catching people with edibles, but now we have all these ones coming from places like Cali. You've the Nerd Ropes. You've got the Cali Bro, I think was the name of it. It was like a knockoff of Harry Bro, but a Cali brand. And Cali weed as well is really poisoning, well, messing up our supply over here because Cali weed can go from 3.5 grams, could be nearly €200 for just 3.5 grams, which is crazy. Like just because it came from California and it's in a pack that's come from Cali, there's people think they're the same cannabis grown here is can't be the same standard. It's crazy. They're getting so used to the PGR appearance of the buds as well. So many people aren't educated here about the dangers of these chemicals that can be used for getting your rock or your nugs as hard as rocks. People are looking for that kind of stuff, not knowing that what's used to produce that is probably not the best of things to be putting into your body. But that's a whole thing that regulation will sort out if we could have cannabis produced under the same regulations that our food is produced under.
Well, you know, and I enjoy potent cannabis, but at the same time, I think that prohibition pushes people towards the more potent varieties, right? The iron law of prohibition is that any drug you ban becomes stronger and stronger. And we've seen it with opiates, where over the last century, we've gone from opium being the most common form of opiates to morphine to heroin, now to fentanyl and carfentanil. And we see that with other substances during alcohol prohibition. Beer and wine were virtually inaccessible, and very strong forms of alcohol were the only kind you could get, often contaminated and dangerous. And while strong cannabis is still like very safe compared to other things, you know, what we've seen with legalization is that the most popular stuff becomes CBD, right? The biggest growth since legalization has not been in pure THC, has not been in incredibly strong stuff. The biggest growth has been in milder forms. And the reality is that most people under legal options tend towards the milder forms of drugs.
Yeah.
And I said, if you want strong cannabis, you should be able to have it. If you want, you know, edibles that are incredibly potent, that shouldn't be illegal. But most people do not want to eat an edible that's going to send them on a rocket to the moon. That's not what they want, right? Most users tend towards milder stuff. And if we have that as an option, it's going to push, people are going to prefer that, right? And generally speaking,
Is
and
that something
so
you've seen over
it's
there?
another example.
Is that something you've seen as the market kind of transitioned from the black market to the somewhat legal market? That people's kind of they got more educated about the cannabis and they didn't always seek out the high THC varieties. And is that something you actually witnessed
I
then?
mean, people still love high THC cannabis, but absolutely, CBD products are the biggest grower, biggest increase since legalization has been in CBD, and the largest one. And I think that THC level is ultimately a misleading way to judge cannabis as well. You know, in blind studies, people do not prefer the highest THC levels and do not consider even that the most potent. That people in my experience, selling cannabis, the smell and the look of cannabis are most important, but the smell is the number one impact. And that's got nothing. You don't smell THC, right? THC has no odor. People are smelling the terpenes and the flavonoids. And that's really what people enjoy more than anything else, right? I will choose my cannabis by scent. And that's a very good guide for most people. But of course, you're not allowed to smell legal cannabis in the shops. They can't open it up for you, or if they do, they got to throw that away afterwards. It's a lot less accessible for people to pick what they want.
Was even
So you look
before
at the number on the
COVID.
package, and you find the one with the biggest THC number, that's going to be the one. But that's not really what people really want when you dig down and get into it a bit more.
Yeah, and that smelling thing that was in before COVID. That's not a new rule.
It's not a COVID rule, no. I mean, and there's some places that do sort of allow it, but they've got to seal it in a certain way. It's very difficult, and it depends province to province, right? But being able to interact with your cannabis before purchasing it is not easy under the legalization system.
That's unfortunate. After being to Amsterdam, that's kind of the first thing that they love to do over in Amsterdam. Is just
Yeah.
they open up the tub and they give you a smell of it, and you're like, oh yeah, that's lovely. Yeah, I'll take a gram or two of that. And it's a great way to check the product as well. But I suppose I could see why that might not be the most hygienic of things. But what's the workaround with
There's
it?
ways of doing it in a safe way. I don't want
Of
buying a bud that's been handled by a bunch of other people
Yeah.
and sneezed on by somebody, but there's plenty of ways to get people to have access to smelling cannabis in a safe and hygienic way.
Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree with you. We've talked a lot about cannabis, but I've been wanting to ask you as well about mushrooms, because I see you started off a mushroom dispensary, a medical mushroom dispensary in Vancouver as well. Was that last year you started that off? Was it?
I did, yeah. I'm certainly not the first person to sell mushrooms in Canada in person or online by any means, but I'm the first guy to do it in my own name publicly and to announce that I'm doing it. And we only do micro doses. You know, I kind of choose my battles and the how far you're going to go quite carefully, right? And so it's Canada's first above ground microdose dispensary. I require people to have some kind of medical documentation, not so much a doctor's note, but that's great. Some of them do. And I do work with some medical professionals who refer
Excellent.
patients to me. But mostly it's people that have got a medical need and have some kind of documentation of that need, and I'll provide them with microdoses. And it's remarkable how much benefit these things can have to people. So when I announced it, it got quite a lot of media coverage, and I said I was going to open a storefront in Vancouver at some point as well, and that got one city councilor quite worked up. There's one city councilor in Vancouver. She's kind of one of my nemesis. We spar on Twitter a lot. She's a big opponent. We do a big 420 festival protest every year, except we didn't have it this year. But for 25 years, we had this festival. And she was a big complainer about it. And, oh, you guys shouldn't be doing this, and you're polluting the air. And so she was upset about my mushroom dispensary idea and tried to put a motion through city council that they were going to proactively stop any kind of mushroom dispensary from opening. But the upshot was that a large amount of people in Vancouver banded together. They created a new group called Decriminalize Nature. The other city councilors all kind of laughed at her and told her this was ridiculous. Her motion was defeated. And the irony is I still haven't opened a microdose dispensary in Vancouver yet. I'm mail order only, but somebody else has. And there's now, I haven't even been there yet, but it just opened late last year. There's a microdose mushroom dispensary opened in Vancouver now, selling mushrooms to people. I think it's great. You know, I want to get mine going as well, but I'm pleased. I don't ever want to be the only person doing this. My whole goal is to have others imitate me or be inspired by me to do similar things. You know, maybe I should be miffed that someone else beat me to it, getting a storefront open first, but I'm actually really pleased and hope to see more. And to me, it's always been about more than just cannabis. You know, we focused on that because it was the easiest one to legalize. It's got the most public support. But I've also actually opened late last year a coca leaf tea house as well. So we import, and it's not legal, but we bring in coca leaf from Peru and Bolivia and Colombia, make tea out of it, and we sell coca tea to people. It's the only place in the Northern Hemisphere that is selling coca tea over the counter openly and publicly. There used to be a place in Amsterdam that closed years ago. I'm the only person doing it in the Northern Hemisphere. And we also sell kratom as well, which is a whole other conversation. And kratom A lot of folks don't know what it is, but it's a leaf from a tree that grows in Southeast Asia. It has opioid-like properties, but it's a lot safer than opioids.
Right.
It's a wonderful substitute for many people to doing heroin, and also it's a great pain reliever and has a lot of benefits. So I've opened this shop, and we're going to incorporate our mushroom. We're actually selling mushroom kits there now, so you can grow your own mushrooms at home. And my intention was to incorporate my mushroom dispensary into this coca tea house that we've built called the Coca Leaf Cafe.
Brilliant.
So I still work with cannabis, but post legalization, it's changed our movement a lot, just because there's different tactics. Many people got into the legal industry, which is good. But for me, it's about moving beyond cannabis into all the other plants and medicines, and the psychedelics and entheogen mushrooms like LSD, like MDMA, like ayahuasca. These kind of things are also making a comeback. And in Canada, and especially in my city of Vancouver, the overdose death crisis is raging. It's been going on for really many years, but now there's like 4 deaths a day from overdoses, all of which are entirely caused by policy of prohibition. And so part of my effort is to move towards, and it's very tricky getting safe access to opioids and those things, but I'm working towards finding ways to make that happen as well.
Somebody there in Canada, I don't know, were they testing the drugs on the street, or were they giving people drugs on the street? I can't remember where it was in Canada. It was another activist that was engaging in they were just...
There was like like we used to do a lot of cannabis giveaways, right? And at 420, we'd give away hundreds of joints at 420 on 420 and these kind of giveaways. And there's a group that I've been helping sponsor that's the Substitution Project, and they give opiate users cannabis. For opiate users who want to, usually it's strong edibles, right? Smoking a joint is usually not enough for pain relief or to sleep when you're a heroin injector, but heavy edibles can help people. Often sleeping is a problem for those on opioids, and they'll use it at bedtime to get to sleep. Well, the edibles can really help with that and with pain relief. And it was when they had a protest and they were giving away heroin and cocaine to people, just small amounts, but it was kind of, we got a safe supply. They had a real hard time even finding clean heroin in Vancouver. It's all fentanyl now, right? Heroin is virtually inaccessible now. And so that was a giveaway they did. And I'm working with that group and those people. We're trying to find sources and going on the dark web and seeing what we can do to get actual heroin. I actually was encouraging people to grow, along with my cannabis seed giveaway. In the last year of it, I encouraged people to grow opium as well. And I gave away opium seeds, opium poppy seeds. And a lot of people were into it. I asked them to send me the poppies at the end, and I could redistribute them to people. And we got a fair amount of play on that, and people were sending me that. And I don't have enough to really create a proper supply yet, but I'm trying to work on growing opium for Canadians to be able to grow their own opium supply, or to make it available for others who need it.
Yeah, definitely. That'd be a much better way of harm reduction anyway than kind of getting it off the black market.
Opium tea can have risks, certainly, but the risk of opium tea is drastically lower than the risk of injecting heroin.
You'd have to do a pretty
or any kind of opium, right? And I'm all for legalizing of injectable drugs as well, but I believe that if we had safer, milder forms, that people would tend towards those as well.
And on the coca leaves, that's a very interesting one that you brought that up, because it's a topic I always kind of come up against, and it's hard to discuss really, but I think that way is a very good alternative for people who use cocaine, that they just get access to the coca leaf tea. What's people's experience with that? Has there been people come in who would be users of cocaine and say, "Oh, this is great. Actually, I wouldn't mind using this on a night out"?
I think the tea is good for that, but I think if you're a cocaine user, probably chewing coca leaf is the better way to go. You get a good effect from drinking it, but you get a stronger effect from chewing it because it goes right into your bloodstream from your cheek. And it's not a rush in the same way as snorting cocaine, but it's more of an immediate effect. Whereas when you drink the tea, it takes like a while for it to go through your body and be built up and create an effect that way. And often the two together works very well. You chew the leaf and then drink some tea. That makes a good mix. But definitely there is some research showing this. And I do have some people who tell me that they are cocaine users, and when they chew the leaf or drink the tea, they're able to moderate their cocaine use. I mean, most cocaine users are just sporadic users anyways, but some people use a lot of cocaine and have troubles regulating their use and dealing with addiction and those kind of things. And In that case, chewing coca leaf and drinking coca tea can be a way to get your use back modulated and it's just much safer and better. There's now fentanyl going around in cocaine, which can be quite harmful to people, obviously. None of that in our products. I think it's a good alternative for many people. And I think cocaine should be legalized. If you want to snort cocaine, go right ahead. But you can snort caffeine powder too, right? That's not illegal, and you can buy caffeine. And some people do that. If you go online and search for it, there's communities of people that like snorting caffeine powder.
Cocoa is
But it's remarkably small, though, right? The vast majority of caffeine users, even those who use a lot of caffeine, they drink it and still drink a lot of strong coffee, right?
Yeah.
And so I think we'd see a similar thing with cocaine. Most cocaine users would just drink it in tea or chew the leaf or make a candy and chew the candy or gum or things like that are kind of an extract, but not as pure of an extract as pure cocaine, but something a little stronger than just the regular plant, right? Sort of like the hash kind of products that are, stronger than the natural plant, but still not a totally synthesized product like that, right? And yeah, absolutely. And I used to drink a lot of coffee. I rarely drink coffee now. I chew coca leaf or drink coca tea, and I find it very beneficial. And it doesn't have the same kind of jittery effect that caffeine can have. It's a bit of a smoother kind of an effect. It's relaxing as well as stimulating. It increases oxygen flow within your body. That's why they use it for altitude sickness, because when you're that high up in the Bolivian mountains or in the Andes, the oxygen level is very low. You can get headaches, you can get nausea. It can be quite intense.
Yeah.
And coca leaf tea or chewing coca leaf helps with that. Your body can process oxygen more efficiently. It increases oxygen flow. When you increase oxygen flow to your muscles, they're more relaxed and calmed. When you increase oxygen flow to your brain, you get more creativity and more thoughts and so it can be mentally stimulating while also being physically calming in a way that coffee really isn't. And of course, coffee and coca go really well together. Coca-Cola, and other drinks had coffee. And Coca-Cola, by the way, is the world's largest grower of coca leaf.
That's right. Yeah.
They import vast amounts of coca leaf from Peru. They extract out the cocaine and they sell that, and they put the rest of it into their drink.
Right.
And if I ever have any legal problems for my coca leaf cafe, part of my argument is going to be, look, under Canadian law, the coca plant and the coca leaf, it's all the same as cocaine. It's all Schedule 1. But if my coca tea is illegal, then so is Coca-Cola, because every bottle of Coca-Cola contains a certain small amount of actual coca extract in it.
Yep.
And that's, people don't believe that, but it's very well documented and it's very accurate. And nobody complains about that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think there's some legal arguments there. Hopefully, I don't expect to go to court or have any legal challenges, even though coca tea is illegal. But I don't think any police are going to care in Vancouver and come arrest me for this. But
well done for pushing the boundaries on this. I think
I think it's important. The main issue with bringing the coca leaf in is just getting it through customs and figuring out how to sort of smuggle it into the country. And it's a challenge. I don't want to get into too many details about how I do that, but it is a challenge.
Yeah.
But I don't
come in by mail.
Yeah, but especially in Vancouver, I got some issues with the Vancouver cops, but in terms of going after cannabis outlets and coca tea houses, they're not keen on starting those kind of conflicts.
Oh, very interesting. Yeah, no, I'm incredibly inspired by all of this stuff. I would definitely I would love to be able to do something like this here, but as you were saying, the laws kind of make it a bit more difficult. Even if I was to set up a grow here to work with some local patients who I know are out there, who I've been in contact with, I would be in incredible trouble. I could be looking at a number of years in prison just for the simple act of putting a couple of seeds into a pot and having a plant grow out of them. I staged a protest here outside of the one where I planted a plant at our city hall. I actually invited members of our public here in Clark City to plant seeds in a pot outside of Bishop Lucy Park, which is also known as the Peace Park. And I brought the pot into the local guard station and I presented it. I said, here is a pot, inside it is cannabis seeds. I have committed an illegal act of cultivation of cannabis. And I challenged them. I was like, look, you have to do your job now. I've admitted to breaking the law. So they sent that off for analysis, and I'm still waiting to hear back from them.
Well, that's great, and a lot of it's about calculated risk, right? And being able to know what the penalties are. And I certainly don't want anybody taking risks that cause them, to lose their liberty or anything. Um, but I think civil disobedience has been the most successful tactic. You know, I've worked within political parties. I've run for political office a few times. I've done all kinds of different tactics, and the ones that have been most successful for me have just been breaking the law openly and transparently and creating the reality you want to see by just making it happen. And so not every country that's going to be successful in, but certain worked well here in Canada, and it's a tactic I encourage others to adopt as well.
Yeah, my opinion is our legal system is so overwhelmed here at the moment with backlogs in our courts. I got caught with a joint April 2019, and it took them until September 2020 to bring me to court. And the court case didn't finish actually until the 29th of November, I believe it was. And I've now appealed that I got a conviction and a €400 fine. But I've just appealed it straight away because it's my right to appeal it. And I'm arguing on the grounds of human rights that the guards interfered with my freedom of travel, my privacy. There was nothing that warranted them to come and search my vehicle on that evening. The reason given in court was that the guard seen me reaching down to the footwell, and I explained to the guard and I showed him my water bottle that I was getting. And to my opinion, I satisfied his suspicion that I was doing something illegal. And no, he still insisted on searching my car. And my argument is that he was basically profiling me illegally, which is wrong. That they shouldn't be able to do that at all, and it's in violation
You
of your
froze up on me
rights.
again there, just as you were telling your story. I'm not sure if you can hear me or not, but I'll say I congratulate you for that. And you know, if every single person who was charged with a cannabis offense pled not guilty and went to court and fought it, we would overwhelm the court system. But of course, there's a lot of personal risk and cost and money and time involved in that. For a lot of people, just pleading guilty or whatever is easier, and the risk is less, and maybe the penalty is not that severe, and so they don't want to do that. But ultimately, if we have overwhelming the justice system with people refusing to accept these penalties and appealing and fighting every step of the way, is a good tactic to overwhelm them and to force them to not charge people anymore.
Yeah, no, I agree. Can I ask on the mushrooms as well? Why is it spirulina? Is there anything about spirulina that
Nothing at all about spirulina. What we do is we actually have two kinds of mushrooms that or options that we sell. We use a golden teacher strain of mushrooms. I just happen to like that one. It's got a good effect. It's used therapeutically. We can't to standardize the potency. You know, we use an encapsulation machine, but there's a little bit of variation, right? So you try to make a 100 milligram capsule, it'll be like 90 to 110 milligrams, let's say, or 95 to 105 or something, right? So if that's pure mushroom, then that makes a bigger variation. But if we dilute the mushrooms into spirulina or oat flour and blend it that way, then that variation might only be a milligram or two actual variation in the mushroom amount, right?
yeah,
And so that gives us a better margin of error because we want the dosage to be very precise. So when you're dealing with organic material and powders and pill mixes and stuff, it's a bit tricky. So we actually do two kinds now. We have one kind of capsule where the powdered mushroom is mixed with spirulina, and that's in a standard pharmaceutical capsule made from gelatin. We also do a vegan capsule as well, and we blend with oat flour for that one. You just need a certain kind of a consistency with something that's just powdery enough to blend, but not so powdery that it's hard to work with, and something that's a neutral base. So the guy who's making capsules for us had been making cannabis capsules for us for a long time, and spirulina was the base that he was using for those. But we also have an oat flour capsule. And in fact, at my Coca Leaf Cafe, we've just added CBD drops for drinks if you want to get a CBD coffee. And we're going to offer microdose drinks as well. And we're going to use the oat flour capsules for that. And we'll just open up a capsule and empty it into your drink, into your cappuccino or coppuccino or whatever. But the spirulina won't work for that because you don't want spirulina flavored coffee, right? But the oat flour is very neutral. So we're going to be using that. But it's really just, I mean, spirulina some people have issues with spirulina, but for most people, it's a beneficial supplement with a lot of, health benefits, but it's really just a neutral base to mix the powdered mushroom in with.
Yeah, I microdose myself there, kind of maybe 2, 3 times a week. But I do it with my morning coffee. But in my coffee, I have butter and coconut oil along with a blend that I make myself. It's cacao powder, maca, and lion's mane mushroom extract as well. So
Right, sounds great.
yeah, it's a nice blend. But what I've been finding is that I think the cacao powder is enhancing the potency.
because when I don't have it in there, I could put in point 0.1 of a gram of a Liberty Cap mushroom, a wild picked one here, and I wouldn't feel anything. But if I have my cacao powder in the mix with the lion's mane and all that stuff in there, um, I tend to feel something a little more than when it's not there. It's interesting. I've experimented with it a few times, but I believe it's the cacao powder is enhancing that. There's some people say there's an MAO effect of the from the cacao powder, but I'm just not too sure. But it's an interesting one. Maybe it's something you can try with
Well,
yourself.
that's one thing, what Western medicine is very focused on single molecules, and our medicines are always like single molecule and studied in isolation. And that makes it easier for the scientific method when you can isolate something. You don't try to do all the different combinations and effects, but in the real world, those combinations are extremely important and how things interact and combine. We've seen this with cannabinoids, where THC or by itself or CBD by itself is not as effective as when they're intertwined synergistically together. But it's harder to study that because you've got all these different things and which one is doing what. And I think that with cacao and with microdosing and a lot of these things, it's not really been studied properly how these things interact. And I expect your experience is very valid, and that these things do interact and often changes the potency and often in very beneficial kind of positive ways.
Yeah. What's the regimen that you would recommend for a person over there for the?
And some of my users ask about lion's mane and other mushrooms, and I say, there's research showing it, go for it, but I don't sell that. We just sell psilocybin. I find the vast majority of my members will dose between 75 milligrams of powdered mushroom and 150 milligrams. For about 80 or 90% of my clients, we've got over 2,000 clients now.
Oh.
That is the dose they use. There's the odd person that finds 50 or 25 milligrams to be effective. Most people don't really feel or notice a dose at that low level. I got a few people that are taking 200 or 300 milligrams. Often when they're taking over 250, it's usually because they're on an antidepressant, an SSRI or SNRI type drug. And those, not in every case, but in many cases, those seem to dramatically reduce the effects of microdosing and of mushrooms. And so they typically need a larger dose. And, a 200 milligram dose of mushrooms is still a very small dose, still far below threshold when it comes to psychedelic ego loss type of psychedelic effects, but still can be felt. If I take 200 milligrams, I definitely feel it. It's a little more than a microdose. It's not a breakthrough dose, but it definitely, it produces an effect.
Yeah.
But for some people, that's what they need, 200 or 300 milligrams, right? And it's remarkably safe substance. There are a few cautions and things to be aware of when taking mushrooms, but it's remarkably safe, especially at these low dosages. And so I feel very comfortable. And usually people at those higher dosages are usually working to reduce or eliminate their antidepressant use. And so they're taking a higher microdose as they work down their antidepressant. And then ideally, when that's lower, they can also they won't need 300 milligrams anymore. They'll get the same benefit from 150 milligrams or something, right? So they're able to do that. But so the vast majority of my patients, 75 to 150 milligrams of dried powdered golden teacher mushroom, that's what I'm finding works for most people. I normally take 100 milligram capsule when I want a microdose. If I want something stronger, maybe 150. I don't usually take more than that for microdosing. If I want more than that, then I'll do a gram of mushrooms and have a full experience.
Yeah, I've been hesitating actually myself to have a full-on experience. It's certainly, I felt I needed it there over the Christmas break, but I just never got around to it.
It takes a day, but it's very friendly. And I get people who want a microdose and they're paranoid about getting too high, and I understand that. But I also try to reassure them, like, you're going to be, I have everybody start at 50 milligrams, and then each dose you increase by 25. So you go up a little bit till you find what works for you. But I also tell them, like, people who take mushrooms in larger dosages, by and large, they really enjoy it. Yeah. And so although it's good to be nervous and be aware of what you're getting into, it's not a terrifying experience. There is research, and I agree with this, that shows that the larger the dose, you get diminishing returns, right? So people think, well, 1 gram was great, so 5 grams, I'm really going to feel better. And it's like, that doesn't quite work like that, right? You get to a point where the higher dosages, the positive effects don't really get increased, but the negative effects and potential fear or confusion or those kind of things, those risks are greater, right? So people should be able to do what they want. I'm not a big promoter of heroic doses and just taking the biggest amount just because you want to get super fucked up or whatever. Like, I think for most people, 3 or 4 grams of mushrooms is kind of the maximum dose you should be taking. And after that, you're going to be getting higher maybe, but you're going to be getting diminishing returns and probably not feeling more love or more connection or those kind of things that you would get off the smaller dosages.
There was a guy I listened to. He gave a talk. He's passed away since. I believe he passed because of the COVID actually as well. Kilindi, I think was his name. He was, I think he was based in New York or somewhere along the lines of that. Anyway, but he was a big advocate of 20 to 30 gram mushroom doses. He was saying that was the correct way to do them. That was how they were done traditionally or indigenously, wherever that he was referring to. That the experience, it's much more clearer or something like that. Now, I've never went and tested that out at all, but it was certainly interesting to hear from him on his opinions on that. But I've not gone past 2 grams of mushroom.
Yeah, and of course, in a legalized system, we'd have more options to try these kind of things out and have more rigorous research and those kind of things done. And I'm not against, if you want bigger dosages, I mean, it's fine. Larger doses of mushrooms are still very safe, but I do think there's sort of a sweet spot where you get to the point where you're getting the most benefits and the least negatives, and higher dosages can reduce those benefits and can lead to more negatives. And the negatives of mushrooms are all very temporary, but there are negatives involved. You can produce fearful experiences. You can, have negative things and that. And like anything else, setting is important, and I don't encourage people taking mushrooms by themselves, at least not the first time, especially if you've got psychological or traumatic issues you're trying to deal with. Taking mushrooms by yourself is not usually the way to go. It's good to have somebody there just to help guide you or kind of nudge you back on the path if you find yourself getting upset or having negative experiences. And I'm sorry, I've got to get going now, actually. I'm really enjoying this conversation, and I wish I could talk more. And if you wanted to do a part 2 even later on today, I could chat some more, but my cafes, I'm supposed to actually be there a few minutes ago. And so I'm leaving my employee there. So I've got to get going, but I don't know if you got enough to go, but if you want to talk more, I'd be happy to continue chatting with you. I really enjoyed this conversation.
I'd love to pick it up again sometime, but I think for now, this would make an amazing part 1, and maybe some other day in coming weeks, we can definitely catch up again some more. And I'll have some stuff going on here as well. A bit of
I've definitely got a lot more to talk about. We've really only scratched the surface, and I appreciate hearing about your activism and your work as well. I didn't know what you were doing, and I'm really happy to hear that. And I hope you keep up your activism and your legal challenges where you are as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. Thanks again for your time, Dana, and best of luck with the cafes and everything you're doing. It's absolutely amazing, and as I say, it's inspirational to me anyway. I take a lot from it, so thanks very much.
I will just get a plug in for my books. I can't send my mushrooms and my cannabis and my coca all around the world, unfortunately. But if you like what I'm doing, if you visit danalarsen.com, DanaLarsen, or potheadbooks.com, I wrote a book called Harry Pothead and the Marijuana Stone. It's a Harry Potter parody that you might like. I've got a green eggs and ham. I'm not sure how big Dr. Seuss is over there, but Green Buds and Hash is a wonderful parody of green eggs and ham. That's probably my bestseller. I wrote a book about the history of cannabis in Canada that, I think cannabis activists anywhere would find interesting around the world. And I got some comic books as well. So potheadbooks.com, that's my plug. And thanks again for having me on.
No problem at all. I'll be certainly getting copies of those because we'll be setting up a cannabis activist hub here soon, and I'm going to have a library inside of there and I'll make sure to feature your book.
Let's talk later. I'm happy to send you some free copies for your library.
Dana, thanks again and best of luck today.
My pleasure. Thank you. And we'll hope we can talk again soon. Take care.
And there you go, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that interview with Dana Larsen. I know I enjoyed my conversation with him anyway, and I really do look forward to picking it back up with him again sometime in the not too distant future. It got ended there a little bit quickly towards the end, so apologies for that if you were enjoying that conversation. Again, guys, don't forget to check out danalarsen.com and also poppiesbooks.com if you want to find those books. And also just to remind you, if you want to support the show, guys, and support the fight for cannabis legalization in Ireland, you can sign up for the patreon.com/martinsworld, or also you can make donations in the form of bitcoins to martinsworld.ie, there's a little button up there on the website where you can make a donation. All of the funds that'll be gathered there will be used to establish a cannabis activist hub here in Cork City and to better our fight for cannabis legalisation across the island of Ireland. So again, guys, thanks to everybody who's taken the time to stop in and listen to the show today. I look forward to getting more interviews there to you very soon, guys. So stay blazed, guys, and keep her lit. Peace.